today we are going to be breaking down the Miami Dolphins and how I project each of their players to perform for this upcoming fantasy season. We're going to be taking the same approach as I did for the Pittsburgh Steelers last video, and just statting out each player and telling you where I would draft them and what I project them to do. Miami is one of the more difficult teams to project because we don't know what to expect. Last year, Fitzpatrick played really well for fantasy, putting up high yardage totals, moving the ball, getting Davante Parker to thrive, and Mike Gesicki played really well under him towards the end of the year, which is very impressive because one thing that's hampering my Miami projections for the upcoming season is they have the worst offensive line in the NFL last year, and it projects to be among the worst again this year. And no matter how good your skill players are, that is always going to hurt you. So I think that's another reason why Tua may not see much playing time this year, because they don't want him to get hit because he is a fragile quarterback. Currently, though, I have Fitz projected for 9 games and Tua projected for 7. Miami has a very difficult beginning of the year, playing teams like New England, Buffalo, San Fran in the first 4 weeks. All tough defensive matchups. They do not want Tua in there against those teams. So I have Fitz playing the first 9, and I have Tua coming in for the last 7 as their schedule lightens up. I have him coming in for 2 back-to-back Jets games to start the year off to help him bump up that confidence. But for both guys combined, I have a combined stat line for them of the year of 3,800 yards passing for 26 passing touchdowns. And Fitzpatrick's per-game splits are far better than Tua's. I have Fitzpatrick in the first 9 games throwing for around 2,414. And for Tua, over the last 7, I have him for 1,512. And Miami's going to be a more balanced attack this year, but I still think they're going to be a pass-first team because Chan Gailey, the offensive coordinator, has never been given a running back in the last 10 years, which he called plays, a bell cow role. And they do not have a bell cow back, but I think it's going to be a split backfield, and it's hard to keep a split backfield going under a terrible offensive line because you're subbing guys in and out, and they're just not getting into their groove. They're getting hit behind the line of scrimmage. It's very hard. I have Miami down for no viable fantasy running backs this year. I have Howard and Breida both getting under 200 carries. Howard getting 160 for 604. Breida for 130, 507, and 2. And both with a small receiving stat lines and finishing as the RB 40 and 41 in my projections. Now, they can be viable options with 175 touches and 150. I have Howard with a 175. The issue, though, is their terrible offensive line. Last year, Miami running backs ran for around 3 yards a carry for the season. I have them around 3.4 to 3.5 a carry, which is a generous projection because, first of all, none of these guys are really that talented. Breida has been a good yards per carry guy throughout his career, but that's also running behind the extremely talented 49ers offensive line. Now moving to the worst offensive line in the league, his yards per carry will go down. If one of these guys is to take all the touches, he would be a pretty decent RB2. The issue is it's going to be a split backfield with a terrible offensive line and a low-scoring opportunity offense. They're not guys I really want to take a chance on. Howard maybe more so than Breida because he can score a lot of rushing touchdowns potentially, and that would keep him fantasy relevant, but I don't think he will because it's not a good offense. Howard and Breida are guys that, at their ADP, they're not terrible picks, but they're not guys that I think are going to break out, more so just depth, bye-week fill-in. I don't really like them for the upcoming season. But now let's talk about the wide receivers. And it's very interesting for Miami. They lost Allen Hurns and Albert Wilson for the season, and that opens up a lot of targets for Davante Parker, Preston Williams. The issue here is how many of those targets are going to be from Fitzpatrick and Tua. That is why my projections are a bit lower. If I knew Fitzpatrick was playing a full 16 games, I would have Parker and Williams for better stat lines than I currently have statted. I'm also a bit down on Preston Williams because he has suffered 2 severe knee injuries in his career, tearing his ACL last year And I understand people have come back from torn ACLs, like Cooper Kupp played really well. But there's also guys like Victor Cruz, who had a severe leg injury, and we all expected him to be hopefully okay, come back to what he was, and he was just never the same, and his career was essentially over. But Preston Williams played well last year, and I hampered his projections a little bit because of the injury concerns for a full 16, and he may not even start the year on time. I've read some reports. But right now I have Davante Parker, one of my favorite players at their current ADP, to finish as wide receiver 15 with his total stat line of 68 receptions for 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. And I would like to put Parker a bit higher here. It's just difficult because if Tua comes in, the main thing that's going to be dropping off in that Miami offense is the yardage totals. And Parker, he thrives with the yards and the touchdowns. In a half PPR, I project him out for, or even a full PPR, which most people play nowadays. He's not going to be a PPR monster because his yards per reception is really high. He's never caught more than 70 passes, even last year. I think it was 72 for the year. I mean, last year he had 1,209. I'm projecting 1,108, a slight drop-off in each category, and he's finishing at wide receiver 15. Now, he's being drafted below wide receiver 15. So even at his, I guess, modest projection, I have him as a value for the upcoming season. I think he has potential to finish anywhere up to the wide receiver 5, depending on the QB play for the upcoming year. Because the targets should be there again for Parker. 130 to 140 is what I expect. It's just, where are they coming from? And how many touchdowns is this Miami team going to be scoring? Because last year it wasn't a lot, and this year I don't think it's going to be many more than it was last year. So we will see. The more intriguing option, though, is Preston Williams. With a far lower ADP, he showed potential last year, but will it come together? I have him statted out for 50 receptions for 810 yards and 5 touchdowns, finishing as the wide receiver 40. And I think Preston Williams is a boomer bust player. I understand why so many are hyping up his fantasy stock for this upcoming season. His target share should be up now with the loss of the Miami wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 4. But I also think there's a lot of risk with him. We've seen him play a few career games in which we got a little excited. We have never seen any elite production. I think his ADP is going to start to rise where he is no longer a value. And I just think that there are better breakout wide receiver options later in drafts, but I could see him eclipsing 1,000 yards if everything goes well for him this upcoming season. Right now, though, I have him as a decent flex play with inconsistencies throughout the year. If he sees a target share of 120, 130, which is unlikely because I think those targets that were lost will get distributed to a lot of players, including Mike Gesicki. Matt Breida will get way more involved, I think, and they'll try to pick up a wide receiver like Quincy Enunwa or someone like that. But if he sees 120 targets, Preston Williams is a sneaky candidate for 1,000 yards, but he would have to stay healthy for a full 16. Fitzpatrick would have to play majority of the season. He would actually have to perform, and we don't know if that's going to be. We don't know if Preston Williams can do all of that. That is why currently I have him as a wide receiver 40 projection. It's tough because the offensive line's bad. They're going to be running the ball more, and we don't know he's going to be playing quarterback, which is always something you don't want to have to deal with. But lastly, we have the tight end position, and Mike Gesicki is a physical freak, and last year we started to see him play pretty well under Ryan Fitzpatrick, putting up some pretty solid fantasy stat lines towards the end of the year to finish as tight end 11, which is a solid finish for a young tight end. I expect him to take a leap forward this year slightly. Last year he put up 570 and 5. This year I have him projected for 706, which is a modest uptick because I expect the offense to be a bit better. And I think that there are a lot more targets to go around with the loss of wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 4 for the Miami Dolphins. Now, Can Gesicki break out? Yes, he has that breakout potential to have a 1,000-yard season. It won't happen because there's not enough quality of target. There's not enough weapons around him to give him ample opportunity to make big plays. But I think with Gesicki, his floor and ceiling are pretty safe. I don't expect him to be anywhere under 500 yards for the season. He's a low tight end 1 option. He's not a guy you want to be starting on a weekly basis. But Miami has a favorable opening schedule. And with Fitzpatrick, he could be getting out to a good start. By favorable, I mean for fantasy, they're going to be down a lot because they're playing good teams. And they're good defenses, but garbage touchdowns and yards is all you need for a low tight end 1 option because tight ends are so hard to find that if you're punting the tight end position, he's not a terrible option to be drafting in the 13th, 14th, 15th round. But I have him as tight end 8, which is a bit generous maybe, but I think there's going to be a lot more targets for him this season. Last year he got 92. I could see him getting over 100 targets. Preston Williams and Mike Gesicki are going to be fighting for those targets, and whichever player ends up getting into the hundreds will be the player getting the better fantasy season, obviously. It's just hard to project. But honestly, the only guys that I'm really looking to draft on the Miami Dolphins are Davante Parker, and a late round flyer on Preston Williams is not a bad pick. Other than that, Jordan Howard and Matt Breida, I don't want either of them on my team. Mike Gesicki, if you punt the tight end position, okay, but not a guy I want for the entire year. And Ryan Fitzpatrick may play decent for fantasy in the beginning of the year, but then again, I think last year was an outlier in his fantasy production. Miami's a team that I'm largely staying away from this upcoming fantasy season due to their offensive line hampering their offensive potential with being the worst offensive line last year in the league. In the next video, I'm going to be breaking down the Cincinnati Bengals, another team that is very hard to project because they have a lot of wide receivers in that wide receiver room. They have a brand new rookie QB, and it could be an explosive offense. It could be one of those breakout rookie QB years, and I'm going to break it down for you and explain to you which players I think are worth drafting at their current ADPs. As always, make sure to like and subscribe, and follow us on our socials at gridiron_guys_YT, where we will be breaking down some more team options about fantasy on that Instagram.